The West is falling. Society has gone mad. Feminism has destroyed the modern woman. Billions must die. Chud, an internet meme that has turned into a full-on digital political movement. And I know that sounds crazy, but just bear with me as you'll see what I mean. I mean, these guys, they're organizing fast. They have their own authors, philosophers, creatives, I mean, you name it. It's really crazy what's happening in the Chud world right now. But I think the best way to dissect the Chuds is to go back and to learn where it came. So, wait,
What the frick even is a chud?
well, I'm glad you asked because it's gonna get crazy. It's gonna be a wild ride, so stick around. The term chud, now widely associated with the chudjack or gigachud, is a common slang term used to describe far-right internet users that just kind of spew on Reddit and 4chan. The name itself actually has its roots in the 1984 film Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dweller, or Chud for short. Now in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the term chud was just used to describe the movie, but starting in 2019, you started to see this term be used in Reddit posts to describe right-wingers, especially in a very negative light, let's just say. This mockery of the far right would continue into 2020, and by that summer, the Chudjack was born. Now, you're probably wondering how the Chudjack came to be a year after the term Chud was invented. Well, to answer that, on Lefty Poll, a far left image board, or it's like an image board form, you get what I mean. They posted a picture of a Wojak that was based off the El Paso shooter Patrick Cruzes. Instantly they associated this picture to Chuds, and the whole idea here was they were mocking the fact that all these far-right internet users, or all these extreme right-leaning people, they were equivalent to school shooters, and they're the types to do it. As you can imagine, the people being mocked didn't take too kindly to this, and started a massive troll attack on the Lefty Poll website. Now, this happened on October 1st and lasted to October 4th. The point of it was just to spam the website and just to kind of, troll around a little bit. I mean, they were getting mocked after all. And at first it was somewhat successful, but then the mods came in and they cleaned everything up. During this time though, a lot of the infamous pictures about Chuds that we see came from this war, because the thing about warfare on the internet or in real life is that innovation goes through the roof. I mean, think of World War II. At the beginning of the war, you had like these World War I planes, and by the end you had nukes. Pretty much the same thing happened in this war, but in terms of memes. I bet this war, or massive troll attack, or whatever you want to call it, would have been so much more successful if these people were unified. Because at the time, Chud was just used as a slang term to describe far right-wingers, right? But it wasn't like an actual group or organization or anything like that. They didn't have their own Chud website or, the same thing that Lefty Poll had. At least they had their own platform. But the Chuds, it was just a term used to describe people that pretty much use 4chan. I mean, let's be honest. We know the people that use 4chan. But this would start to change eventually, although it would take a couple more years. From 2020 to 2022, being called a chud was not a good thing. It was actually the opposite. Dare I say, a bad thing. Even if you had right-leaning tendencies, you would not want to be called a chud because of the stigma that was attached to it. Although starting in 2023, the stigma was starting to crumble. The reason that the stigma started to peel off was that some of these right-wing users on 4chan or Reddit or other forums, they started to embrace the term and even liked being called the term. Now, this might be confusing because why would you like being called something that meant so bad to so many people? Well, the reason why was because being called a chud may have been a bad thing to other people, but for these right-leaning people, the fact of the matter is that a lot of things that were commonly associated with Chuds also were associated with them, so instead of running away from it, they started to embrace it. Things like they wanted a traditional wife, a woman that would not work in the workforce but instead stay home and raise children. Things like smaller government, or no government at all. Things like, racism. And despite how you feel about these people, you have to admit, if there's a term on the internet and you align with many ideals of this term, then naturally you're gonna eventually gravitate towards it, even if it's seen as a bad thing. This brings us to 2024, and there's definitely been some developments. Now, the word started out as an insult, but at this point, people really started to embrace it, and there's full-on forums, image boards, other websites popping up, and they're really starting to take over a little bit. I mean, not completely taking over, don't get me wrong, they're still underground, but they're starting to grow in size. In particular, I'll be focusing in on 2 websites specifically, those being chuds.life and chudstar.com, which I will link in the description if you're curious to check them out. One quick scroll through either of these websites and you will soon see the people are proud to hold the Chud name and view it as a digital nationality of sorts, if that makes sense. They have gotten organized and sophisticated with their own set of rules that's based half in fact and half in fiction. To show you what I mean by this, I will read some of their mission statement so it's a little more clear about what I mean. The Council of Chudases meets in the Grand Hall of the COC, a magnificent edifice adorned with the Chudalist symbols and ancient scripts. Here, they deliberate on crucial matters, blending foresight with military acumen. Their leadership ensures that the Chudstars illuminate the path forward, while the Chudmarie stands ready to defend it, embodying the perfect harmony between wisdom, liberty, and martial prowess. Martial prowess. Why do the hairs on my neck feel longer after reading that? In all seriousness though, it's obvious that these Chuds don't actually meet in a real life grand hall, but it's not all fake, as when they use fiction, it's mainly to exaggerate issues they believe are most crucial to society. Moving on to the lore of the Chuds, and man, they have created quite the backstory for themselves. And again, just like their mission statement, it's based somewhat in fact, but also somewhat in fiction. I mean, there are a lot of dorky, practically pure fiction pieces that do make up the lore, but there is also some insight on how the Chuds operate and how they think. A lot of the stuff they say is, I'll be honest, really dorky. But to be fair, I think I might be a little bit of a dork because it's kind of interesting to read. Like, I actually really enjoy reading it, and whoever wrote it, like, good job to them. In one of the lore articles titled The One True Sigma Males, they conclude that they are the highest echelon of masculinity and justify this by giving 5 main points on why that is. Those being independence, authenticity, resilience, minimalism, and intellectual curiosity. I think this article was a good example of how the Chuds view themselves as defenders of the Western world and believe that they are the last hope for humanity, pretty much. Or that's kind of what it seemed like while reading the lore. And while this may not surprise some of you normies that expect this, I think there is a big difference from Chuds and just regular far right leaning internet users on 4chan or Reddit. And I think the biggest difference is that they value creativity, artistic integrity, beauty, and all this stuff that I did not expect. I honestly expected these people to just be trolls, like straight up trolls, straight up people that just lived in their mom's basement. And if you scroll through the forums, I mean, there is a lot of those people as well, don't get me wrong. But I think there also is a lot of members that do follow this, creative code. The code for intellectual curiosity, the code of wanting beauty and more out of life other than just the typical 9 to 5. Or at the very least, whoever wrote the Chud lore and the mission statement and pretty much everything about like the Chud culture, whoever wrote that at the very least believes in this. So that kind of got me curious. Who was this author? Who was this guy that wrote all this lore, that wrote all this culture? Who's written down the Chud ethnicity? If you can call it that. So I spent a while researching to find out who this author was. Now, I started reading the lore, and there was a couple pieces about specific users in the Chud kingdom, I guess you can say. But I just didn't feel that those people were the authors. I mean, sure, they had cool stories about them that were completely made up. Well, not completely made up, but mostly made up. The point I'm trying to get at here is that it was not them. I just didn't feel that. And I was kind of, growing wary, and I didn't know where to go to next. So, I just started reading the forums, and I found this one guy. This one guy that wrote in a similar style to all the rest of the lore and culture and mission statement. And his name was Nagelbud. But what I got at here is that this guy was like a real writer. I actually found this out because he has a website that he linked, and I went on it, and I was just so astonished this guy was not just a Chud-based writer. This guy Nagelbud, it looks like he's been a writer for the past 10 years, and he's been working on his website for subsequently the past 10 years as well. I mean, this guy's a real deal. He's written over 10 books. He's written many journal entries, which I'm gonna link below, or I'll link the journal entries on his website below, because they're just very interesting, and I don't know, I just think they're super interesting. But it's clear to see that it's not all internet trolls, and there certainly are people that are growing the movement that actually have skill. I know that's mean to say, but let's be real. A lot of these internet users, they don't have a lot going for them, and by a lot going for them, I mean they literally have nothing, unfortunately. Alright, to wrap up this video, let's recap on what we've learned. In a nutshell, the term Chud was coined at the beginning of this decade and was used to describe far-right internet users. There was quite a stigma behind it, but in recent times, the stigma has started to fade and given rise to a full-on Chud movement, and was inspired in large part by Nagelbud, a philosopher, a writer, and just overall someone that's curious about this world. Who knows where the Chuds will go from here, but I'll tell you one thing, the Chuds are rising up and are slowly sending shockwaves all throughout the internet. I mean, I see it on the forums and how many people are signing up for them, so it's only a matter of time before Chuds go from the underground to the mainstream, and no longer will they be laughed at, instead we'll be getting the last laugh. I mean, I'm sure they'll be laughed at by a decent amount of people still, but they'll be taken a little more seriously at the very least. It's crazy how a fringe group of just these right-wing trolls pretty much have come together and now have organized and have actually just started to collaborate and just work together with each other. It's kind of beautiful in a way, especially because, like I said, I don't think these people have much going for them, so at least they have some sort of community instead of just nothing or nobody. I mean, I honestly think these people should just go outside, but at least this is cool. I mean, they're building kind of an organization together, kind of a movement. I mean, that's kind of sick. But let me say this, the Chuds, I think, will continue to grow in size and influence over the internet. And even though only time will tell, I think we're on the grasp of a full-on revolution on the internet with the Chuds taking over the mainstream narrative. No, that's kind of a stretch. I know that the narrative is controlled by all these news companies and media companies and podcasts and all that stuff, but it does seem like there's an overall movement to the right in society, and the Chuds may just be the group to rise up and claim the throne as the leaders of this movement or something like that. I don't know. Like I said, only time will tell, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. Alright, that's all.